Okay, so very warm welcome to everyone across the globe joining us this afternoon for our webinar on Chinese food contact materials regulation. This is the second part of the webinar. The first part we held on the 25th of April, so just 3 weeks ago, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about the enforcement. We have with us as expert speaker today Dr. Marco Zong, and I'm very pleased, Marco, that you were able to join us, so thank you very much for that. Marco is the director of the National Reference Laboratory for Food Contact Materials in the Guangdong province, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. Marco is also chairman of the expert committee on food contact materials at the National Food Industry Association. So ni hao, Marco, and thanks for joining us live from China. So Marco is just getting ready right now, uploading his slides, and I'd like to use that as an opportunity to just give you a little background about Food Packaging Forum Foundation, who we are. So we're a charitable foundation established 5 years ago in Zurich in Switzerland. We focus on science communication on chemicals in all types of food contact materials. We're interested in migration of chemicals from food contact materials into food and the impact that these chemicals have on health. We try to keep our eyes peeled for new science that comes out, the current scientific topics and issues, and we provide that information to our users in form of daily news updates on our website. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to for free. In case you haven't done that yet, I recommend you give that a try. And we have webinars like the webinar today. We have dossiers, background briefing papers, and we also do a workshop. I'll talk about that in a little moment. And we run by donation. So if you like our work and if you want to keep our work going, if you want to support our independent scientific communication, then please consider making a donation to Food Packaging Forum. Good. Now, what are we going to discuss today? As I said before already, this is about food contact materials regulation in China, part 2. Marco, as soon as you're ready, I'll be happy to hand the webcast floor over to you. In the meantime, for all the attendees that are at a computer, please, if you have any questions, send us your questions by email. You can email us under events@fp-forum.org, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. We received quite a lot of questions after the last part of the Chinese food contact webinar, and Marco has seen those questions and he will try to address them, as many of those as possible. Okay, and right now, then I would like to hand over to you, Marco. Marco, thanks.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, everyone. First of all, I'm deeply apologetic for the the problem occur for the network. So thank you. And thank you, James' introduction. It's my pleasure to continue the presentation on China's new legislation for food contact material. Today, I will go to the second part to share how to demonstrate the legal compliance after the Chinese new legislation coming into force. Okay. As we know, GB 4806.1 as the framework standard play a very key role in the legal compliance, and this standard will come into force in this October. Therefore, we need to have clear understanding of this standard. I would like to highlight some of the important requirements and key points set up in this standard. First of all, we can see this framework standard is applicable to all kinds of food contact materials, including packaging, container, utensil, and instruments, and also including the coating, inks, adhesive, lubricants, and so on, which will directly or indirectly contact with foods. But detergent, disinfection, and public water supply facility not included in this food contact material legislation because they are regulated in other relevant regulations. As the framework legislation, this standard set up the basic requirements on compliance of the food contact material in China, which include the basic requirements, limitations, rules for compliance, analytical methods, traceability, and information for products. If someone asks me what's the core requirements in this framework standard, I would like to highlight the three key provisions I call three of the should nots, which means the migration of the constituents in quantities to food, number one, should not endanger the human health under intended forcible use. Number two, should not cause the change of composition and organoleptic character. Number three, should not cause the technical effects on packaged food, but it's not applicable in certain circumstances. For example, active and intelligent materials is not applicable for these provisions. Other basic requirements are also introduced into this framework standard, include the amount of active use in the manufacture of the food contact material should be limited to as low as possible. For certain substances, such as the colorants, the criteria for quality should be fulfilled, which is set up in standard for active notifications and other specific standards for material and articles. As nanols pose a potential risk for safety of food contact materials. So therefore, the standard set up the requirements that the manufacturers should control the nanols in food contact materials. And another aspect is the industry quite concerned if the non-approved substances can be used in the manufacture of food contact materials. The answer is yes, but only if they comply with the following requirements. So I will give you more detail in the next slides. When I talk about the GMP, this standard also set up requirements the manufacturing of food contact materials should comply with GB 31603, which is with reference to the GMP requirement from the food and from the drugs. For the proposal checking the compliance, other than basic requirements, some of the specific requirements are also introduced to address the rule of compliance. The key contents are summarized as follows. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Are you advancing your slides?
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems I lost the slides. Okay, yep, it was.
Great.
Okay. Let me go to the specific requirements. As I mentioned, the specific requirements are introduced to address the rules for compliance. The key components are summarized as follows. First of all, the use of the raw materials should meet the requirements laid down in relevant safety standards for articles and notification. Secondly, the use of the additives should meet the requirements laid down in GB 96 and 85 and relevant notifications. For the finished articles, they should meet the requirements laid down in relevant safety standard for articles. The technical specification like overall migration, specific migration, and so on should meet the limitations set up in relevant safety standards. The producer of the food contact material should establish a traceability system to ensure the traceability of the food contact materials in every stage of the supply chain. Also, we need to keep in mind that the production information should be presented in an appropriate way, which is clear, complete, and not mislead consumers. So, after a long time waiting, in November of 2016, the National Health and Family Planning Commission formally published about 50 GB safety standards for food contact material, and the majority of standards will come into force in last month after 6 months transition. From the perspective of compliance, new GB safety standard actually pose a big challenge for both competent authorities and industry to perform the compliance job, since this new system is not easy to understand and to fulfill in such a tight schedule. Here I will share some of my thoughts and advices. In general, after the implementation of the new GB safety standard, food contact materials can be exported into China and to be sold in the market only when the food contact material fulfill the requirements laid down in relevant safety standards. For example, you need to check the additive use if listed in GB 9685. You need to check if the migration of the target substances comply with the limitation set up both in GB 9685 and other specific standards for articles. It would be a risk for the company who only perform the compliance with reference to the single standards. You should look at variety of standards and perform the compliance from the perspective of the supply chain. After all the job you done, you can have the confidence to demonstrate that the material or articles comply with the framework standard GB 4806.1. Among those requirements mentioned above, when we talk about the practical implementation, I would like to highlight several key points which are crucial for demonstrating the compliance against Chinese safety standards. First of all, the user needs to make sure the raw materials and additives used should obtain authorization in positive list or notifications. It would be taken as non-compliance if the raw material or additive is not included in the positive list, even though the finished articles pass the test. For those substances who are not listed, it also can be used if they meet the following criteria. Number one, is not directly contact with the food, which means it would be blocked by function barrier, and the migration of the substances would not exist 0.01 milligram and kilogram of food. And also this kind of substances will not be the CRM substances, and also not belong to the nanomaterials. And the manufacturer also need to carefully look at the relevant provision set up in GB 31603 for GMP requirements. It's acceptable to demonstrate the compliance by a way of self-concurrent or to obtain a certificate issued by a commercial, commercial technical institute or a third-party body. Labeling and identification information is quite often neglected by industry, but actually is a key item for competent authority in China to perform physical check in the border and in the market. According to the GB 4806.1, the framework standard, the finished articles should choose appropriate way to indicate that the article is suitable for contact with food. You can use the symbol of the spoon and chopsticks. It's quite similar to the symbol in EU, but actually they have they put some traditional Chinese character into the symbol. Or you can use the wording for full contact or for full packaging. And you also can not display any symbol if you can demonstrate the article is quite clear to be used for full packaging or in contact application. For example, kitchenware is quite clear for contact with the foodstuffs. According to the requirements set up in this standard, those product information should be displayed preferentially in finished product or labeling. The labeling should be placed in prominent position. If it's not visible to display in finished products or in labeling due to technical reason, it can be displayed in the user manual or in other company documents. So it's quite flexible to display the symbol or the wording for full contact with food. When I talk about the migration is a very key factor to demonstrate the finished product comply with the requirements set up in standards. According to the standard, we need to consider several testing methods will be applied in the migration testing. You need to consider the general rule for migration testing, which include the GB 31604 which address the general rule for migration. You can find a simulant. You can find the exposure condition, like the exposure temperature and the exposure time to perform the migration testing. Also, you also need to consider the GB 5008.156 to complete the treatment on the sample. And finally, you need to select specific method for target substance to run the migration testing for specific migration. For example, when you talk about the PAA, you need to take the specific testing method for PAA, and also you need to consider both of the general rule for migration and the general rule for pre-treatment to run the specific migration testing for PAA. Here I would like to share with you a basic workflow when you perform the compliance in China. Number one, you need to collect production information and DOC from your upstream supplier. Based on the information you collect, you need to investigate and have very clear understanding the intended use for the food contact materials. And after analyzing of the information you collect, you can apply the appropriate regulation or safety standard to identify what's the risk for the food contact materials. What's the next step you need to take to perform the migration, to perform the compliance job. And number four, you need to check if the raw material and additives has been authorized from the competent authorities for use in the manufacture of food contact materials. Number five, as I mentioned earlier, the manufacturers need to perform assessment of NIOS based on export adjustment, DOC, and also you can apply screening methods like the TTC or other analytical approach to assess the NIOS in the food contact materials. And after the job you done, you will perform the migration testing on target substances by using appropriate tank or analytical methods, which provide irrelevant standard or other sources. After you collect the testing result, you can compare the result with the requirements or the limitations set up or laid down in relevant standards to track the compliance for the finished article or materials. And also you need to carry out GMP audit based on the safety standard. And finally, you need to prepare the declaration of compliance we call DOC and the supporting documents. After you develop the DOC and prepare supporting documents, you need to deliver such kind of the documents to the downstream user or the competent authorities as a request. So I would like to give you a conclusion for my second part presentation. When I talk about the current price of food contact materials in China, we need to realize the legal compliance should be fulfilled in the whole supply chain, from the chemical supply to the raw material producer, going to the food contact material producer and the end user, for example, the food brands. Maybe also you need to consider consumer and the competent authorities, which means each shareholders share the common interest and have the responsibility to demonstrate the compliance. We couldn't perform the compliance job just simply done by one person or one company or one step. We need to working together through the whole supply chain. So there's an urgent need for the transfer of information from up suppliers to the end user. So this is what I would like to share with you on the second part of presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Great, Marco, thank you very much. We received quite a number of questions after the first part of your webinar, Marco, and I was wondering if you are interested and willing to go through those. I noticed that time is running out, but I think if we take another 10 minutes just to go through those questions, would that be okay?
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Okay, so the first question, and I will just go through them one by one. Could the new Chinese legislation on food contact materials be a model for global harmonized legislation? What are your thoughts on that? You're not a politician, obviously, but
yes, yeah. Actually, it would be great if one single legislation can be applied globally, and Chinese legislation can be taken as one of the candidate model. But I think it's still a long way to go to reach a harmonized legislation. You know, it's a lot of the factor you need to consider to do this such kind of work. I'm not the legislation. I'm not the lawmaker, but I think in the future it's going to be good, but it still be a long way to go.
It would certainly make work a lot easier for many people. Yeah, I agree. Maybe to follow up, related to the first question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the Chinese new food contact material regulation compared to US and EU regulations? Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm not sure how well you know the EU and the US regulations.
Yeah. In my point of view, I would like to say China has successfully established a legislation system covering a wide range of materials and articles. I would say it's comprehensive, scientific, and practical. The consumer in China will benefit a lot from a much higher protection than before concerning the safety of the food contact material and foods. One of the biggest challenges we are facing is how to make the transition of information was, as I mentioned earlier, it's quite hard work for the shareholders in the supply chain to open the information they have. So this is quite challenging in China right now. So we are continuing to convince the supply chain to open their system to be happy to deliver the information we need for DOC or for the compliance job. Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting, because I think that's not only a problem in China, stakeholder communication throughout the supply chain. So that would be interesting to hear about your experience with that. Okay. Now, maybe some more specific questions. Are polymerization aids out of scope? in GB 9685. You spoke about additives. What about polymerization aids?
I think it's still under discussion, as I know, and not yet decided. It would be appreciative if the industry can provide us more information on this issue. We will have several meetings on this issue because it's quite technical issue. So we need to correct the information we need and to make some assessment to make a final decision. It's believed to be is expected to make a conclusion by the end of this year.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Another specific question that we got: when will the new regulations be entering into force? I think part of them entered into force in April this year, and another part in October. So, for example, GB 9685, is that in force already? It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Which means you have already answered the question.
And what about the on migration testing? That was GB 31604.1 and GB 5009 156. Are those in force already?
Jim, could you tell me
the question
again?
Yeah. So this person was wondering when the new regulations will enter into force, and so I was just asking you for some of the specific regulations that you mentioned during your presentation now, whether they were in force already, and that was on the migration testing. You mentioned GB 31604. The migration testing, has that entered into force yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so maybe you can tell us which regulations will be entering into force in October. Are those specific measures?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, the majority of the standards published have entered into force in last month in 19 April. But when we talk about the framework standard, GB 4806.1 will come into enforce in 19 October.
Okay.
Due to the government considering it would be much better to provide a longer transition period for the industry. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. That's helpful. Excellent. Okay, then we have one specific question, whether the migration testing, which is required for supporting documentation, does that need to be performed by a certified lab? Like, does it need to be a Chinese lab, or can that be done by any kind of lab that is able of testing migration?
The reason is, that the legislation in China requests the compliance reports need to be issued by the third-party labs with the accreditation of the CNAS, which is the accreditation body in China. But we need to keep in mind these requirements just applicable to that kind of government campaign, surveillance campaigns. So which means it would be okay for obtaining from the commercial lab without accreditation of the CNAS if such kind of compliance work is not for the purpose of the government surveillance campaign.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good. Well, with that, I think I would like to end this webinar. I know that probably most of you still have many more questions, and we're all just starting to get into the new Chinese food contact materials regulation. But I would like to thank Marco very much for giving us some insight into this. And this has been very helpful. Thanks a lot, Marco. Um, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us in this webinar today, and thanks for your questions. Thanks for participating. We are lucky that Marco is joining us for our workshop this year in October. So it will be the fifth workshop that Food Packaging Forum is holding on the 5th of October. So shortly before the GB framework enters into force. And I invite you to join us at this workshop, and it would also be a good opportunity to maybe ask Marco some more of those questions that are itching under your fingernails concerning the new Chinese food contact regulation. We will be following up with our next webinar in June or July. We still have to set the date. We haven't confirmed that yet, but the topic will be mineral oils. So please visit our website for details on that for our next webinar. And you can also, of course, visit the website to watch a recording of today's webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care. Have a great day. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you for James.